And now to actually start stitching. So we're going to go back to our pattern for a second. And up here, I'm going to start in the upper right-hand corner. I don't know if you can tell, but the first little symbol that I'm looking at is the 2 dots. So I look over here at my legend, and the 2 dots tell me that it is 796. So that's the color that I'm going to start with. And it looks like I have to do a full 100 stitches of that color for this very first square, because it's only just that color. So now I know what I'm doing. So I'm going to go find my 796 bobbin, and I'm going to take one of those pre-cut lengths off. Put my bobbin to the side. Now, like I said earlier, this in an earlier video, floss is comprised of 6 individual threads. Now you can do this one of 2 ways. My default is going to be picking one of those 6 strands, and I simply pull. Sometimes it can get a little tight, like it won't pull right now, and then I kind of just tease out the tail, and then it'll pull free. So now I have 1 strand and 5 strands. So I'm going to set the 5 strands aside for now. I'm going to take the 1 strand. I'm going to find both ends. In my finger, and then it's now folded in half. So we've got 2 open ends at one side and a loop at the other. Now I'm going to take one of my dull needles. So that's out of the pom-pom with 2 needles. And you can either just thread it manually like this, so needles threaded, or if that is difficult, I'll show you with the needle threader as well. So with the needle threader, you hang the needle on the threader, and then these 2 strings, and again, make sure that your strings are still lined up so it's directly in half. Pass them through the opening of the needle threader a little bit, and then take your needle, slide it off, and now your needle is threaded. Whichever works for you, whichever way works for you. And do make sure that the open side, and mine did get a little bit, you can tell here on the Ada background how one end is much longer than the other. I am going to fix that. So I brought them back together so that they're even, holding that in my finger and just kind of tugging on the loop to stretch that back out so that when I'm stitching I don't have mismatched tails. That just really makes sure that you're not wasting any thread. And you want your open tails to be shorter than the tail with the loop. So then you're going to pick up your cloth, and again, I'm starting 2 squares in, 2 squares down, because I want to leave that 20 stitch edge for finishing, whichever way I end up deciding to finish this. So I'm taking my needle, and I'm going to go down, or going to go through the back of the fabric to, if I can find the right hole, to the second hole down. So that's, it's going to be the bottom left hand corner of the stitch that you want to start with. So I'm starting right up in the corner. So I went, you can tell. So that's the very corner. That's going to be the very edge, both top and left of the pattern. I went 1 down from that. I inserted my needle from the back of the fabric up through the front. Now you don't want to pull it all the way through. Before you get to that point, you're going to want to go diagonally to the upper right hand corner and take your needle and pull it down through the fabric, and then flip your fabric over. So you're looking at the back of the Aida, and that's where you're going to pull through, and you're going to catch that loop that the thread naturally created by folding it in half to secure your thread. And then you're going to go down one stitch or one hole from where you came up. That takes you to the bottom right hand corner. You're going to pull. Now, if you were doing only one stitch, you would go through the upper left hand corner and finish the X. However, since this chunk that I'm working on is this entire first square by the grid, I am going to take and go through the upper right hand corner of the next stitch, and I'm going to continue doing that until I get all the way across the square. So you'll see a bunch of slashes appear. If you are finding it hard to stab blindly from the back of the fabric to get to the correct hole, you can always flip it when you're doing the back stitch or the back part of it and line it up that way if that's easier for you as you learn. You notice on the back you're going to have a row of straight lines, and on the front you have a row of diagonal lines. And then when you come to the end of that row, or when you come to the last stitch that you're going to do in this section, instead of continuing to go up into the right, you're going to come back and do up into the left, and that will finish that stitch. And at any time you notice your tails are getting very close to the fabric, where you might end up double or stitching through with 4, make sure that you are pulling your string out and increasing the length. So you'll have to do that periodically, because you don't want to end up stitching with 4 threads instead of 2. You'll notice that the stitch will look different, and then of course when you come to an end, you won't be able to get your needle out without cutting it, so we definitely want to avoid doing that. Almost done with this first 10 stitches. Only 9,990 to go. This particular pattern has 10,000 stitches total because it is a 10 by 10 full coverage. So when I come to the last stitch, I do go in just like normal through the upper left hand corner. Now to go to the next row below it, I'm going to go down one stitch, so straight down from where you finished, and then you just continue on. So now I've done quite a bit of stitching, and I actually have a knot on the back of my thread, which you can kind of tell here. It's a pretty simple knot. This happens occasionally. What I will do with these is kind of just get my needle up underneath it and kind of end up just pulling it out until the thread is a straight line again. And in my case, I've got to kind of tug on that tail to make sure I have enough length, and then I'm just going to go back to stitching. So the most common knot like that, where it's simple, it just kind of got, the thread kind of got pulled on itself, because the thread does tend to curl just a tiny bit as you're stitching. Those knots are pretty common. Getting close to the end of the string here. See, I just pulled out a little bit more length. Just stab it away. Now, when you're getting down to this point and you kind of think that you don't have enough thread to finish the row all the way, you can either leave a bunch of half stitches, or if you would like, you can go back and finish these. I am going to finish these. And as you can see, my needle just unthreaded itself. So that's fine. I'm going to stick it back in the pom-pom. And I'm going to show you one of the things I like to use the needle threader for rather than just threading your needle. So you're going to take the needle threader and you're going to go up from behind, because my thread is on the front. You're going to find the right hole that you want it to go through. Okay, so the needle threader is now through the hole. You're going to then take your thread, your little thready tail here, and thread it through the needle threader. And then the needle threader is going to pull it to the back of the fabric. So that finished the stitch for me. And now, because I still have 3 more stitches, and I know that I probably have enough thread for 3 more stitches, I am going to go ahead and use the needle threader to finish those 3 stitches. You don't have to do this. You can simply use it once to get the thread to the back of the fabric, trim the thread, and go on if you want. It's totally up to you. I just do this because I don't like wasting thread. So the least amount that I can cut off, the better, to start a new string. It is, again, something completely up to you. If you don't feel comfortable doing this, don't have the hang of it, it's not a big deal. Either way, you will have enough thread in your kit to not do this if it's something that you find difficult. You may need to wet the thread to pull it back together if it's separating out like that was for me. I just, licked my finger, threaded to keep the threads kind of together. I'm almost done here. So it doesn't take super long to finish up that tail. So this is the last stitch here. So now it's all those stitches are finished. Do still have a little bit of a tail. So what I'm going to do to keep the back neater, now the back doesn't have to be perfectly neat. And in many cases, it won't ever be perfectly neat. Should show you the back on some of my other projects. But I'm just kind of threading the needle threader underneath some of the stitches, and then I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to fish that little tail up, and in this case I didn't get both strings at once, and I'll go find the other string here as well and fish that up through the needle threader and kind of just tug it through. So now it's secured underneath there. And then, oh, I forgot to put the little needle minder on. So once it's threaded, I will then go trim that edge just so it doesn't get in the way. If you don't trim your edges, sometimes what will happen is they will end up causing knots in the future, things like that. So that's the first string done. Now, at this point, I'm gonna put my little needle minder on here, put that up out of the stitch area. At this point, you could choose to do another string of the same color. I'm actually going to show a different color here real quick because I want to show you what it looks like if you were to choose to stitch with 3 instead of 2. So most commercial kits for 11 count are going to, in their directions, tell you to stitch with 3 threads. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. I'm using the color 939, which on my pattern acts as the stained glass edges, because it's a stained glass rose, so this is the border color for everything. So what I did is I took the 3 strands on either side, and I'm kind of just separating out the threads. Sometimes they'll be a little persnickety and not want to come apart. Just gently coax them until you've separated them all the way out. Now you don't have to stitch with 3. I have provided enough thread that you can stitch with 3. I personally have always stitched only with 2. It does mean you'll get 3 lengths of thread per cut or per piece. This is really not wanting to separate out into chunks of 3 here. And sometimes what will happen is if you've picked the wrong 3, it will just kind of tangle a little bit on you. So you kind of just have to go find the individual thread that is stopping it. But as I was saying, so you don't have to stitch with 3 threads. You can stitch with 2, perfectly acceptable. You are going to see more of the X. It's going to be more visible. But the name of the game is cross stitch. I personally like being able to see that it's an X. If you do not and you want to stitch with 3, you're certainly welcome to. Like I said, the kit includes enough thread. You will start it slightly different. So I just threaded the needle with the strand of 3. Now because this is a stained glass rose, I am using 3 strands for the outlining. And then I'll be using 2 strands for everything else. So I'm working on the little diamond symbol here. So I'm going to go down and I will show you a little bit of how to travel or how to do stitches that aren't in big groups by kind of going into the stained glass rose part here a little bit ahead of where I normally would, but I do want to get that on film for you guys. So when starting either 2 or 3 strands, you do the same first step where you go in to the second hole, and then you're going to go up to the right, and we're going to flip it over. Now you have this exposed thread. There's no loop to catch, but what I'll do is I will make sure that the thread is coaxed to go underneath that downward stitch. So I'll make that stitch so that is secure now. That thread's not going anywhere, but because there's such a long tail, which is a little wasteful, I will always end up pulling it so it's a lot smaller and then just retightening that stitch. Now, because looking back at the pattern for this little diamond symbol that I'm working on, it's only 1 stitch wide. There's not a whole bunch of stitches that I'm doing, so I'm just doing the column down. So I'll do 10 stitches of that, and then I'll go over to here and do 10 stitches that way. And then, well, actually much more than 10, but I'll continue on that way. So I'm going to do that first row down to the count of 10 and then go over here underneath that blue grid line. So I'm going to stitch down here to start that leg of it. And you can see how, got another, not necessarily a knot, but sometimes your thread will kind of tighten in on itself when you're trying to pull through. So you might just have to pull that thread on the back a little bit. And sometimes you'll get caught on the clip and you'll have to just pull that out from the clip as well. It would be so much worse if you had all of that fabric flopping around that you could get caught on. I'm just going to keep going like that. And you can start to see how much thicker and bolder these stitches are because there's that third thread where you can't see much of that white at all compared to the first color that I did. Oop, got caught on a clip again. And that's really the basics of how to cross stitch.